You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas.
Thanks for listening to this bonus episode of Mind Over Murder. In these next two bonus episodes, we bring you back to two discussions with the members of TIs for the Missing. Investigators Lou Barry and Greg Overacker discuss the Brianna Maitland case and steps being taken to solve that missing persons mystery. Thanks again for listening.
Welcome to Mind Over Murder. We are joined today by Louis Barry and Greg Overacker from Private Investigations for the Missing to talk about the Brianna Maitland case.
We'd like to thank all of you for your very kind comments about Mind Over Murder. One in particular stood out for us this week. A listener named Andrew tweeted this morning, "I've heard many different podcasts tackle Brianna Maitland's case. This is by far one of the most succinct, informative, and hopeful takes on this case. I believe Othram will do their best, hopefully finding a lead for law enforcement to hunt down and finally finish this." We know there's been a lot of great coverage on the Brianna Maitland case, and we hope to rise to the level of some of the other coverage we've heard. Thank you so much. That really made our day here as we were recording a new episode. Thanks to all of you for your ongoing support.
For more coverage on the Brianna Maitland case, stay tuned here on Mind Over Murder.
Thank you both for being here. We really appreciate this.
It's a pleasure, and thanks for providing the coverage to the case, because that's a case like this, that's what's going to solve it, is information.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks. Our friends at Crawlspace have done an extensive amount of work on this case, and I had called up Tim and Lance, and I said, "Hey, are we stepping on your toes if we talk to Lou and Greg and do some coverage on the case?" And they were like, "No, great, this is fantastic," because I think they feel the same way, which is that more people we have talking about this case in Vermont and across the country, the more chances we have for finding out what happened to Brianna Maitland, which is the topic of this discussion.
So we're being loaned out.
Yeah, on some level.
Well, there's another word for that, but
I actually thought you were going there for a second.
Bill, the thing is with Lance and Tim, not only are they good at what they do with the crawl space and getting the information out and everything else, but they're also members of the board of directors of Bruce Maitland's nonprofit. This type of publicity is good not only for her case, but for other cases out there where people who can't afford to hire private investigators can take advantage of private investigations for them and utilize their services.
And we've made some wonderful friends with some very nice people. Yeah, they're both very nice people, nice families.
Oh, that they are. We're very proud to be part of the Crawlspace media. We like to call it a juggernaut for some reason.
Yes.
We're very proud to be associated with Crawlspace.
Let's go ahead and start by you guys telling us a little bit about yourselves. So, Lou, we know you were a police chief for many years. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I started off down on the Cape as a police officer for about 11 years. I was a patrolman for a short time, and then detective for 6 years, and then sergeant, and then relocated back to the western part of the state and became police chief. I stayed there for 24 years and then retired. I've been teaching as an adjunct at colleges since 1990. I still do that at a couple of different locations. I do a lot of training at the police academy. I filled in twice as an interim chief at a college, local colleges, and I try and do this as best I can on the side. This is like my passion, I guess. Investigations always was, even when I was a detective. And of course, when you're chief, you don't do that anymore. You might oversee things, but you don't investigate. But I got into private investigating actually through a friend who was filing a civil suit after getting the statute of limitations on civil suits changed relative to sexual assaults on children. And she had been abused as a child and wanted to file a civil suit. So I became a private investigator basically to help her out and do an investigation. And fortunately, she got a nice settlement in federal court. And I did a couple other cases after that. And then there was a lull. So I was familiar with Brianna's case, and just because I went to college in Vermont and I'd seen it and it was interesting. And so anyways, I fell into that, missed the cold case aspect of it. And now that's pretty much my focus.
Wow, that is really excellent. Greg, is it true that you really started off as a bounty hunter?
I did things backwards.
Doesn't it look like dog?
I did. You know what? We used to go to Las Vegas to professional bail agents of the United States would have a convention there.
Oh, I'll bet that one's a hoot.
Yeah, we'd take classes and stuff. So the bondsmen that I'd go with, they had different things. And of course, you'd have dinners and auctions and stuff like that. I'd take classes and stuff. But he insisted, he sat at our dinner at one point before he was known. I don't remember him being there, but there was a table of 20 people. But later on, he went on to give speeches there and stuff like that. It was just interesting. Nice little backstory. But yeah, I started out backwards. I started out doing that. I went to school to criminal justice, but I was just absolutely bored with my life. I wanted adventure. I was in a really obscure business. It's obscure where I live. You go to certain states like New Jersey at the time, you could walk for blocks and blocks, and there was bail bondsman offices, one right after the other.
That does say something about New Jersey, doesn't it?
Yeah. California was like that. Colorado was like that, which is where you mentioned dog. That's where he was for a long time, was in Colorado. I was kind of shocked, actually, that he could function because he was a felon. And I think that's maybe why he went to Hawaii. But anyway, I would travel to New Jersey because I worked for a PI in New Jersey. I still do. But New York didn't have a lot of bondsmen. It wasn't a big thing here. So I would advertise nationwide, and I would get like a 1% to 4% return. Like I would blanket states with advertisements, and I would get returns. So I traveled a lot. What they would do is they would call me in New York to try to bring someone back from the Northeast to, say, down to Florida or wherever they were at, the Carolinas. So I would pick them up, take them down there, get paid, and come home, rather than those people driving all the way up here to look for somebody. You know what I mean? That's how that business functions. But I did that for a long time, and it was all I thought it would be as far as being exciting and everything like that. But at some point, you just get tired of traveling and being in hotel rooms and not being home. And I had people here. I wanted to come home and be with my family. I wanted to take care of my property and stuff. So eventually I started a process serving business. I had repossessions on the side, and I did PI work. But oddly, when it came to this looking for missing people, I was on the thruway with my daughter on Father's Day, and I saw Brianna's poster. I had taken her to the restroom, and I was on her like a hawk, of course, being in a public place like that with a little kid, especially a little girl. And I'm waiting at the bathroom door, and the poster was there. And when she came out, I told her to commit it to memory, and she did. And she was young. And I got home, and I did a bunch of research on it and contacted the family and kind of went from there. This is what I hope to transition into and just do this alone. And Bruce and I had this conversation for years about the nonprofit. It's just between working and doing everything else, I didn't have time to go do this. I talked to a few attorneys about it and stuff. But when Brianna's reward money had come timed out, they have to put it into a certain account. And eventually the money doesn't get used. It times out. They'd have to do it over again. He took the money out and applied it to starting a nonprofit.
So this is the origin of private investigations for the missing?
Yeah, when I went up and met with them in Gouverneur, New York, where they were living at the time. And it seemed really odd, and I would hear a lot of people say this afterwards. It seemed odd to me that they would move away from where Brianna went missing, because you're thinking to yourself, they got to stay there. They have to find her and this and that. They had to get some sort of normalcy. They just had to. And it wasn't that far away. But every day, it was just constant. I can remember Kelly telling me, her mother, that she would go first thing in the morning to McDonald's to get a cup of coffee, and they'd give her a forlorn look and hand her coffee out to her and say, I'm sorry. Because that's how I started my day, you know. So quickly, I was running back and forth to Vermont a lot at the time and staying up there for a few days at a time and stuff and getting court paperwork and whatever. But it's expensive. And we got talking about it. There's no way anybody can afford this. How could anyone possibly afford to pay an investigator? They charge anywhere from $100 to $200 an hour, sometimes more, plus expenses, gas, food, lodging. You'd have to be wealthy to afford that for months or maybe even years. So it was a great idea. I think it's the only one I've ever heard of, the only one in existence operating like that. Yeah, so this is where I ended up. I still work here at home. I do other things, but I'm slowly transitioning into being there full time. And hopefully Lou will too, because we don't want to lose him.
Just a couple observations about what he just said. Now, one, I met Greg. We actually met him because he was, can you shut that door for me? He was obviously well involved in a case before I got involved and wanted to work along with him and everything. And then he told me a story one night, and he was chasing this guy, and he wound up out in the freaking woods in the middle of nowhere in Vermont. And the guy was in a cabin, and there was gunshots fired. You remember that, Greg? And he walking the guy out of the woods. It was like, I said, I got to work with this guy. I mean,
that was up on the Canadian border.
That's freaking dedication. Okay, it's 4:00. We're out of here.
So, I think about that now, and it seems crazy, but at the time,
it was crazy.
At the time, it just seemed this is what I'm supposed to do, so I just do it.
The other observation, if you made note of his story, he brought his daughter into the place, and he saw the poster, and he said to her, "Remember that, memorize that," because he didn't want to. So he made her memorize it. And when he got home, he took notes off of what she told him.
Yeah, well, that's because she had a sharp, uncluttered mind.
Oh, and you use the resources that you have.
That's right. It kind of broke my heart. I'm sitting there thinking it's Father's Day, and here's this girl has a father who doesn't know where she is today.
Yeah,
that broke my heart.
Yeah.
And that goes back to that whole thing where I get frustrated with the police because we don't know what they're doing a lot of times. So they could be very active and we don't know it. You just automatically assume they're not. But for every day they don't work or they're not aggressive or they have other things to do, someone is in horrible anguish. And it just goes on and on and on. There's another case we're working right now where it's 34 years in. And then you talk to the investigators and other investigators, PIs and stuff that have thrown in the 2 cents of work. And they say, maybe next month. It's been 34 years. Shit or get off the pot. Do something. Stop making a date for next month. So that's a frustration I have.
How long have you been involved in the case, Greg? Just for our listeners, Brianna disappeared in March 2004.
Yeah, that would have been Father's Day 2006 when I saw her poster, and I got right on it after that. I called the family and drove up. When I got to the Maitland's house initially in Governor, I remember finding the address, and it was a farmhouse, and there was a long driveway and barbed wire fence. They had horses and stuff. They had alarms on their driveway. They had 2 dogs that acted like they were going to kill me. I don't know if they would have, but I think there was a certain amount of just tension. And they had threats that came their way and stuff like that. And that always really bothered me. I thought, who the hell threatens someone whose child's missing? What the hell's the matter with you? What kind of mental defect do you have? But that happened, and it happened regularly, which is the whole reason they had alarms and everything.
As we've discussed, Greg, it's common thread to these cases is the 2 suspects, if there are no suspects, are a family or the police. And that's over and over again. The first people they look at is the family. And one of the reasons they moved from Vermont is Bruce said that people would give him that look like he knows what they're thinking. Were you involved?
Yeah, that's awful.
Yeah, it is. It's terrible. You're victimized twice. And then the fallback position, it must have been the police and it's a cover-up.
Yeah, the police really went over Bruce hard. They really went at him hard. And so that's the default position too. That's really frustrating that when you talk to people that think that the police involved, which Lou and I have talked about this a lot, it's like a default position. So I don't understand what happened. So I go back to the police. And then you ask people, what makes you believe that the police were involved? Well, they were there. Yeah, they were there. Someone called the police. They showed up. So they were there. But kind of like Maura Murray's case and stuff like that. But they really don't have, most people that believe that there's nothing to back it up, at least not very strongly. So that never came up. Yeah, that wasn't really an issue with this. But
I do find the threatening of the family to be really disturbing.
It's like pain begot pain, misery begot misery. Yeah.
That's tough.
Lou, do you remember when Waylon was living, this was, I think, before you came in, but Waylon was living down in the southern part of Vermont. I can't remember where exactly. And a newspaper article came out written by Hank Albarelli. And at the time, Waylon was living with, I think he was engaged, but she went out to the post office or to the mailbox, and there was a letter in there that said, I'm gonna kill your girlfriend like I killed your sister.
Oh my God.
He was still in Vermont, northern Vermont.
Yeah.
He was living in a house out in front. I think that was
many years after.
Oh, okay. My mistake on that.
Yeah. But they never found out who did it. The article came out and named names. And of course that threw a bunch of stuff in there.
The impact on the families is just, you see it over and over again with this. The families are torn apart, and a lot of times there's divorces, and the family gets split up. They're barely talking to each other. It's over and over. It's a common thread. It's the same thing. They just keep getting victimized inadvertently, obviously, but it just doesn't stop. It's not, they're gone. It just goes on and on until there's some type of closure, I think.
I had said to Greg earlier today that, using my own experience in the Colonial Parkway murders, we're not necessarily seeking a prosecution at this point. It's 30 to 34 years for us. I'm not saying I'm speaking for all 8 families precisely, although I've had contact with all 8 families, and we do speak pretty frequently. But we're really looking for answers at this point. Now, if were ever given a perpetrator or a potential perpetrator to focus on, my attitude might shift. But right now, when I wake up in the morning, I'm mostly looking for answers, more so than I am a prosecution. I even said to our FBI agent recently regarding another case, I said they convicted a guy and they suspect that this guy may have been involved in numerous other rapes and murders in Virginia. And one of the things I said to the agent who had worked the case in a support role for local law enforcement, I said, if there were ever a place where you got to that you were fairly certain that someone, this particular criminal, had been involved in these other cases, it would mean a lot to those families if you were to reach out to them and say, look, we believe that Mr. was also involved in your sister, mother, what have you, rape or rape murder, but he's in jail. He's going to be in jail for the rest of his life, and we don't have enough to convict him in your family's example, but I think it would make a great deal of difference to those families to know that the person that did this to their family has been caught and tried and convicted in another case. So in a lot of ways, it's more about answers than it is necessarily about a prosecution. I'm not saying that Bruce Maitland and his ex-wife Kelly might feel that way. They might be completely focused in another direction, but I think everybody's mileage may vary a little bit in these cases that drag on for, in this case, 16 years in the Maitland example.
Yeah.
You're right. I agree. I think in this case, I think everyone would be, I don't want to say satisfied, but at least somewhat relieved to know what happened to her and not necessarily see someone punished for it. Although obviously that's ideal. Right now, without proof, law enforcement's not going to say that because, say, for instance, suspect X, they feel pretty strongly did it and don't have enough to charge him, and he's walking the street, and a relative decides to take matters into their own hands. Now you have another situation on your hands, and that person may have not have done it.
Yeah.
Just because it's a very tightrope that they have to walk a lot of times, and that's why they don't clear people. You don't want to clear someone because they may have an airtight alibi as to where they were, yet might have been involved in a conspiracy to do the crime. So they never come out and say, okay, so it was cleared, even though they feel he's not involved.
Can you expand on that a little bit? Because I've been following the cases. Kristin and I have been plugging into the Brianna Maitland disappearance more. And I noticed the other day on social media, a guy was arguing that a particular suspect, and we can leave names out of this, he's saying he was definitely cleared. And my experience is there is no such thing. Can you two respond? Is anyone cleared before a case is cleared?
No, and for exactly that reason. They will not say this person is cleared. They may say we feel he's not involved, but you're not going to come out and say they're cleared because unless you've solved it, again, you don't know. If you could clear someone and then turn around, as I said, and say, okay, yeah, they didn't murder this person. However, they hired the person that did. You can't clear someone.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
As far as I know, and I can almost guarantee it, 99%, there is no video of that person coming back from Canada through customs.
Yeah, I actually thought that one was a real...
I don't know where that came from, but Greg, have you ever heard that?
No, who are you talking about on camera?
Dilley.
Oh, no, he was
online said there was a video of him coming through customs and
who said that?
somebody online. It was just one of
No, there was nothing like that because he never did.
No,
He wasn't in Canada.
he wasn't in Canada, right?
Yeah, so they can't exist. We thought that for the longest time. That's another thing. As time goes on, your opinions sway, everything ebbs and sways, and you get more information, so you change your mind, or you realize you had bad information. And that was a situation where we had bad information, and I had bad information from extremely good sources where they said, look, you don't need to pursue A, B, and C anymore because of A, B, and C. Well, that just wasn't the case. He changed his story. How many times did he change his story?
Every time somebody talked to him, he changed his story.
And then the final story that he gave to Lou was probably the correct one, was most likely the right one. They grilled him till he was literally crying. They really hammered him good from what I understood. What was the time frame he gave you? 2:30 a.m. He was coming from.
That's what he said originally. No, I take it back. Originally, he said he came by about 4:30, but he eventually said it was 2:30.
Right.
And he hadn't been to Canada. He'd been doing some illicit activity
with another individual who mentioned over and over again, and even had part of his property searched. And then he said he saw the vehicle, knew it was hers, with the lights on. Yeah. And he approached it, and both doors were open. Passenger and driver. He shut both doors. On my line of thinking, he shut off the lights. Part of my thinking on that was that he wants to place himself there. He wants to tell you he was there because he's afraid they'll find his fingerprints because he touched the vehicle.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder. Although this guy, James Robitelli, and it's spelled Robitaille with a French pronunciation, right, is Brianna's on-again, off-again boyfriend. So, Greg, as you've pointed out before, his fingerprints could have been on Brianna's Peter Oldsmobile any number of times riding in that car.
Yeah, they were friends. It's a weird thing when you talk about these kids dating and stuff like that. The dating pool is thin.
These are
small.
Really small towns.
I went to a small high school, and I think my graduating class was 120 people. You dated through the class. You know what I mean? It was just common. These guys, it was really bad. It was just, but they were all friends too. And whether they dated different people and this and that, they were all friends. But yeah, he could have been. But that was just my thinking, was that, does he want to tell the police that he was there because he knew his fingerprints were going to be on that car? Or did he honestly do something stupid by walking up, shutting the doors, turning the lights off, and then just driving home? And then you ask him why he didn't call the police. Her car's there abandoned and stuff. And he said, I'd been drinking and stuff, and I wasn't going to call the police and get them there to arrest me. So, okay, understand that. And it's all very hanky.
But Robitelli, Lou, as you were saying, as Robitelli's story keeps changing, though. I was in Canada, which is not far away from northern Vermont. I went by there at 4:30. I went by there at 2:30 a.m. Now, I know he's drunk and high and who knows what else when this incident goes down where Brianna's car comes up abandoned. But what do you make of the changing stories?
I think you can factor in a few things. First, the activity he was involved in, he's not going to come out and say to the police, hey, this is what I was doing. So he's got to make up something. And we're not talking someone who's, as we said, Greg mentioned the type of crime he was involved in before. That's the type of mentality we have here. We're not talking about a master criminal. Maybe it was the best he could come up with at the time. And now, years later, you're talking about a memory that's 14, 15, 16 years old, in a haze to start with because of substance. And we run into that a lot talking to people. It's like, what about this? Jeez, I really don't remember.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago, and I was messed up at the time. And you hear things, and the memory gets jaded. And I think that would excuse a lot of it. Why he didn't tell the truth a lot, some people are just like that. I've dealt with people like that before that just...
In his defense, and to the people that love him that are going to listen to this, we didn't know him, so we don't know if he was just an average guy who made a couple of stupid decisions and just didn't tell the truth, or if there was something nefarious there, but it doesn't look like it. You know what I mean? It's hard to tell at this point.
And
look at how he died.
Yeah, to be clear, we are referring to him in the past tense. So because
unfortunately, he was killed in a car accident.
Yeah, which
on the wrong side of the road at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, rushing to work. That kind of describes him. That's not good judgment.
Yeah.
Probably not a bad guy, just doesn't show good judgment.
I'm going to push back lightly. He killed another man in the car coming the other way, and he was on the wrong side of the road. So
Unintentional, though.
Oh, yeah, no.
Judgment, unintentional.
Yeah.
That's him.
But that man went to his death because James Robitelli was on the wrong side of the road early in the morning.
At a high rate of speed.
And crossing the line as he headed over a hill, which we're not talking genius moves, and it cost him his life as well as the other motorist.
Right. It shows poor judgment. And I think that kind of explains his character. Not necessarily intentionally bad, but poor judgment. Go ahead, Greg. I'm sorry.
We heard a lot of stories about the overdose. That was a common theme. That was constant. You'd hear she overdosed and then people panicked, which is why there are laws in effect today that if somebody overdoses and you call for help, they won't blame you for anything. You can have drugs present. They don't care if you're high. They just want to help the person that's harmed. We didn't know if there was somehow an involvement where she had overdosed and had just made a poor judgment call somewhere along the line there. That seemed more fitting to what with the information that we had about him, rather than him actually intentionally doing something nefarious. I think that his friends would tell you, no, that's just not him kind of deal. You know what I mean?
The other thing to keep in mind about this whole, I guess you call it an atmosphere up there, is police presence is minimal at best. They talk about if something happens, you're on your own for about a half an hour, Greg? Is that?
Yeah. It's the strangest thing.
You're on your own. You
got
to do what you got to do because help isn't coming.
That's really reflective in when you get to know the people. That's something that you come to realize that you don't know, you can't put your finger on it at first, but they know that's the way. I drove one time with a friend. He went with me because I didn't want to go up alone to do an interview. And I drove from the bottom of the state all the way up to the Canadian border. And all the way back, and we saw 2 cops. That's it.
Wow.
We saw one on the highway, which must have been a trooper years ago. But then we saw one in Rutland because we came back a real weird way, and we're just going the way we were going because we were just going home. But, we just traversed the state twice. We see 2 cops.
There's no local police presence up in that area in the smaller towns. St. Albans and obviously Burlington, South Burlington are different, but you get over into the Montgomerys, into Enosburg, and you're more apt to run into a border patrol agent than a police officer. They just don't.
Do you remember me telling you that my brother and I went up to Maura's crash site one time, Lou? We went up there. He was living in Albany at the time, and this was when we were discussing the whole thing of whether Brianna and Maura's cases were related. Of course, everyone correlates the two because of the fact that the car was by the side of the road and they're gone. There's some similarities, and they were close geographically, and they were close. One happened a month after the other. So we took a ride up there because there was people that gather every weekend and do searches. So we went up and talked to them, and then we drove up to the crash site and looked around and stuff like that, and just kind of got a sense of stuff. But we got stopped by Border Patrol on the way back. And I'm not kidding you. I'm driving my brother's Chrysler 300M or whatever it was. And there was a cop with a dog about 40 feet away. And one of them, they were young guys. One of them walked halfway up to my car and he goes, "You got any illegal this, that, and the other thing in the car?" And I go, "Nope." He goes, "Go ahead." And I drove away and I thought, nothing to see here, just 2 perfectly nice white boys in a fine car.
Ultra tight security.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, geez, we could have had a whatever in the trunk, and it just didn't even bring the dog near the car. But that was reflective of how porous that whole thing is. And the stories we hear from retired troopers up there, that it's just crazy. You're up there, you get no radio, cell for service, no nothing. And again, just they're used to it. That's the way they live.
Bruce swears to this day that had they assigned a trooper that was assigned to that area, that case would have been solved, because he was a no-nonsense. Everybody was afraid of him. He would not hesitate to go and get information if he needed it. But they didn't. They took an investigator from somewhere else and was not familiar with the area and got nowhere with it. Because the locals just, who are you? They're not going to talk to anybody they don't know up there. And he swears to this day, had they put this other trooper on it, that he would have got to the bottom of it if it was someone who was from that area.
Speaking of locals, so since Brianna Maitland disappeared in March 2004, there seem to be a ton of questions that surround her circle of friends. So why do you think that her friends may know more about her disappearance?
Where are you going?
Greg is leaving the room.
Greg just left the room.
Lou, unless Kristin and I answer the question, it's all on you.
I think the problem is primarily that, and it was interesting to see Lou have to go through this after I did for years, because when he came in, I thank God he's coming in, because it was too much. It was sensory overload. It was just too much, and I couldn't do it in work, and it was it bothered me, and I was obsessed for a while. I actually took a break for quite a while, but go interview people, they tell you a story, and you're thinking, oh my God, this is it. They would name names, they would tell you places, they would tell you times, they would go on, and none of it would pan out. It would just all be bullshit. And you think, well, you're used to people lying to you occasionally, but this was just seemed nonstop. It's just a real issue with no one up there seemed to be, even about trivial things.
Everybody up there seemed to know what happened, but nobody knew what happened.
Yeah.
Everybody had a story, but
did any of them?
Had any evidence.
Did any of the stories line up, or did everybody have a different version?
There was similarities. There was the the wood chipper story. There was the pig story.
Wow.
There was the buried on the farm story.
These are harsh.
Yeah, and in variations thereof, there was the barn floor was concreted over. It just goes on and on. This one was involved. No, that one was involved. And this guy tried to kill himself and left a note. And I read the note. Did you read the note? No, I didn't see the note.
I believe that story wholeheartedly. But there was, do you remember, I got a Robitelli one, he had told us, he said, he told Lou, was driving down the road the day after Brianna went missing. The girl was walking down the road. I picked her up. She's a friend. I picked her up, gave her a ride wherever she was going. Here's the story she told me. And it was a first person account, blah, blah, blah. So I actually went along with you to interview her. So she shows up. So now this is the girl that told the story. She showed up. She was.
You missed this part. She called the police on me first. Remember?
Oh, that's right.
Because you're so suspicious looking?
Nah, she didn't even see me. She just knew I was coming.
Yeah, we were meeting at a pizzeria. And so that's right. And then the police called you and asked for your credentials.
Yeah.
And then she showed up and she was high. She had literally just smoked a joint before she came in. And the girl she had with her was 17 and pregnant or something.
In a foreign national.
And then what can you add to this? That somebody's making it up. And she was wearing clown shoes. But she said, I have no idea what you're talking about. It just never happened.
And Greg had his coffee and left.
Yeah. I was like, all right, I'm going. I was away. I'd been out on the road for a little bit. So I'm like, I'll let you follow up from here because I'm going to get back on the road. I get real frustrated. I just want to reach over the table and throttle people. But she just said, I honestly don't know what you're talking about. And where do you go from there? That just happened repeatedly. It's over.
And yeah, her name would pop up every so often. Oh, yeah, so-and-so knows it. There are so many layers to this thing, and you try and peel them away, and you wind up with the layers are all gone and there's nothing there. It's enough of the story is true that you keep going at it. We had at one point someone who had recorded another person talking about it. Finally tracked this guy down. He said, yeah, I recorded some conversations when I didn't trust my ex. But she never said anything about that. So a little bit of the story is true, but
yeah, very
frustrating. And I've only been on it for 2.5, 3 years. Greg's been doing it. He had hair when it first started. He had hair.
Drove me nuts. I would drive all the way up there and spend a few days and talk to people and ask different questions, and then it would just all fall apart, and I would be really just depressed about it. I would get what I thought was very promising information.
And now with COVID, it makes it even worse because you really can't travel and interview people. It's got to be done on the internet or on the phone. It's frustrating. There's a lot right now that should be being done that isn't being done because of COVID.
Yeah.
And not all with us. So
It seems like there's a through line of discussion about drugs, drug use, drug dealing throughout. Can you guys speak to that at all? What have you uncovered in your own investigations about how that may or may not be involved with her disappearance?
It may or may not be involved in her disappearance, but is involved in the Vermont lifestyle up there with those kids. You think about Vermont, and I always think of, I went to college in Vermont, so I was pretty familiar with the state. You think of covered bridges and cows and maple syrup, and in reality, it's heroin and cocaine and kids that have nothing to do except use heroin and cocaine. And we laugh down here in Springfield and Holyoke because a couple times a month, they'll arrest a group of people from Vermont. Why? They're in Vermont plates and in the drug-invested areas of Springfield or Holyoke driving around. You might as well have a sign held up saying, I'm here to buy heroin. Unfortunately, it's reality up there. It's scary because you don't think of those rural areas as being drug havens. You think of the inner city urban areas.
Right.
Yeah, great. We laugh. We kind of ironically laugh all the time about up there. It's all about sex and drugs.
It's boredom, I think.
Yeah.
It's being removed, isolated a little bit. So back in the late 80s and the 90s, remember how bad the biker gangs were in Canada? It was really a big issue. They would bomb bars and stuff like that. You can look it up. It's pretty interesting. But biker gangs took a real interest in Vermont just because it was easy to get there and easy to sell drugs there and stuff like that.
And no law enforcement.
The border was an easy thing to cross back prior to 9/11.
You could pretty much just drive across.
Yeah, I can remember asking Bruce, because I went up to the property. It was for sale. I went up with Hank Albarelli, and I called him, and I said, how far is the border from here? He said, where are you? And this is where you face. And he said, all right, turn to your left and walk about 400 yards. I said, really? Yep. I said, is there a fence? He goes, no.
Yeah.
Because every once in a while, you'll see a little bit of an old rickety fence or something. He goes, but that's it. I go, because I never lived near the border. So what, you could just walk across the border? He goes, oh, yeah. He goes, I'd be out there cutting wood. He goes, I'd see guys come walking by through the woods, waved to me. They're carrying a backpack. So if guys can carry 10 or 12 pounds of weed or whatever on their back, what makes you think they couldn't carry a dirty bomb or something in there? It wasn't an uncommon thing. And I remember Hank went to a meeting one time, he lived in Richford for a while. He was from Burlington. He went to a meeting and he asked a question of whoever the police official that was there talking. And he said, can you tell me about what the amount of drugs is that's coming over the border here in this area? He said, as much as they can carry, as often as they can carry it. And I was like, okay. So he had called me the next morning and was telling me about this. But yeah, I think it's a boredom thing up there. That's the problem too. So Lou and I got discussing these statistics one time. So and I have it printed up here. I should have got it out because Bill and I had talked about it briefly. But there's statistics for when a child goes missing that are really, you can be confident in them because of the statistics are 80 or 90% of the time a child is abducted I'm going to probably get this wrong, but within a quarter mile of their home. But they go by ages. And so they know it's not like it's a 50-50 or a 60-40. It's pretty confident how often they get killed, how far they are from the point of where they get killed to where they're found. It's really pretty site specific. But the problem is with Brianna's case is that she was a certain age, but she was living as an adult. So right. The statistics go out the window. She's functioning as Bruce likes to say, she was 17 going on 25. She was confident, but naive at the same time. So that kind of throws a wrench in trying to think of it in that way.
There's also a very high risk lifestyle.
Exactly. That's what I think I was trying to get at. Yeah. She was their acquaintance.
Why don't you, I don't know whether Bill and Kristin are familiar or not with who Hank Albarelli is. You've mentioned him a number of times.
Yeah.
Okay. Hank was an investigative journalist who lived in Burlington, and then he moved to Richford, which is right there in that area, Montgomery. So he wrote two of probably the best articles written on Maura and Brianna at the time. Maura for whatever reason, got a lot of publicity, but Brianna didn't.
Right.
But so when he covered them, because there was a thought that they may be related, he included them together. It was really interesting. And he did a lot of he came up with some really great stuff. He was a little conspiratorial. I got to say that, but he did come up with some great stuff. Unfortunately, he passed away. He had considered a bunch of times writing a book about it. And I always tried to prompt him to come back in and do stuff because as much as he would come up with stuff that I didn't agree with, he always came up with something really good. It was James Renner with Maura. He kind of hated his opinion and some of the stuff he says and stuff like that. But at the same time, he really did come up with a lot of good information that was useful, very useful.
He had some good sources, Hank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to try to link to some of Hank Albarelli's stories in the show notes of this episode because you guys have recommended him and we've heard great things about his writing. I'm so sorry that he's passed because, as you said, it sounds like he did some really outstanding work. And you might not have agreed with everything, but there was good stuff in there.
Yeah, it was unfortunate that he put out these articles, and when you find them on the internet now, they're cut up. There's pieces missing. I've got the hard copies, the old hard copies I printed up, so I know when I read it, I can compare it to say, oh, they left something out or they edited it or something. He actually had, I don't know if it's still up, but he had a website where you could buy his books and stuff like that. And his daughter's she's some kind of screenwriter or something in the UK. He would travel back and forth from Florida to the UK. Different guy, but he because he grew up there and because he spent so much time there and stuff, he'd go talk to these kids. The kids loved him. And I say kids, they were young adults, but they loved him and they trusted him, and he did good by him. And he took people right into the barracks, and they want to talk to you. The police would take him in and talk to him. So that was good.
Join us next time for more information on the Brianna Maitland case, when we'll be talking to Louis Berry and Greg Overacker from Private Investigations for the Missing. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.